Monterey area, which is one of the special focus areas with emphasis given to revitalization and enhancement of the area and promotion of restaurant development as a specific policy action. Similarly, among the purposes of parking standards in the zoning regulations is to offer flexible means of minimizing area devoted to vehicle parking by allowing reductions in the number of required spaces in situations expected to have lower vehicle parking demand, and also to encourage bicycling, transit use, walking, carpooling, and other modes of transportation. So based on the conclusions of the parking demand study and given the physical constraints to providing additional on-site parking spaces, and considering the city's policy promoting restaurants in the Upper Monterey area, staff is recommending that the commission adopt the draft resolution approving this requested parking reduction based on the findings described in the resolution and subject to certain conditions implementing the recommendations from the parking demand study, including those related to promoting alternative means of transportation to this business. Alternatively, the commission may wish to consider continuation of this item with direction to staff and applicant, or may deny the requested reduction based on findings of inconsistency with general plan, zoning regulations, or applicable policy documents. And that concludes my presentation. I thank you for your time. Happy to provide additional information or answer questions you may have of staff.
Thank you very much. Do any commissioners have questions of staff? Commissioner Munoz-Morris?
Thank you. Perhaps this might be a better question for the applicant if they're here, but I was just curious, when I was reading through the report, it mentioned that the site would, the kitchen, I guess, or the site itself would be supporting 2 other restaurants that the applicant has in town. And I was just wondering how much of the business activity is expected to be kind of on-site sales versus that support to the other businesses, and if that kind of influences the decision-making behind the recommendation.
I don't have the details on that, and I think the applicant can explain that. The presumption here is that we're operating the coffee shop here and not a catering kitchen, for example, so any of that should be really very accessory to it.
Any other questions of staff? All right, seeing none. Is there an applicant presentation?
There's not an applicant presentation, but there can be one if you want.
It's totally your prerogative. It's not necessary.
Sure. Yes. So I'm the applicant, and so the commercial kitchen, or the kitchen aspect, will be baking pastries both for sale there and for my other 2 restaurants in San Luis Obispo. But the coffee house aspect will be on the front side, you know, along the windows, and will outpace whatever is sold to the restaurants. That's sort of it in a nutshell. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So do any commissioners have questions of the applicant? All right, seeing none. Do we have public comment?
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to state for the record at this time that the live stream is up on YouTube and on the city's website. I haven't received any requests to speak on this item. However, if anyone in the audience would like to submit a speaker slip now, I'd be happy to accept that. Okay, Chair, seeing none.
Thank you. So we'll bring it back to the commission. Do we have a motion and a second to at least start our deliberations? Commissioner Jorgensen.
Sure. I'd like to move that we adopt the draft resolution and approve that includes the parking reduction request based on the findings and subject to conditions of approval.
Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'm happy to second. I think the parking is obviously consistent with the current design, considering the previous use. I agree with staff's analysis of the walkability of the site, and that the parking study does provide the necessary support. So happy to second.
Do we have any other comments of commissioners? Commissioner Vice Chair Khan?
Yeah, I'll just make a comment. I visited the site and looked over the plans, and I think it's a good use of the property. I'm looking forward to seeing that in there. And it's kind of a neat old building. You know, I kind of was looking at it in the apartment upstairs and everything. It's very nice. So I plan to support it.
Any other comments?
Ditto. I was gonna say the same, yeah.
All right, great. Well, we have a motion and a second. So Deputy City Clerk, can you call roll, please?
Commissioner Jorgensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Hopkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Munoz Morris,
Yes.
Vice Chair Khan,
Yes.
Chair Quincy.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
Great. Congratulations. And so Commissioner Francis needs to rejoin us now, I think. All right, the next public hearing item before us is a review of Phase 5 of the Avila Ranch Development Plan located at 175 Venture Drive. I'd like to ask each planning commissioner if they have any ex parte communications to disclose regarding contacts with anybody disclosing information outside of this meeting that should be disclosed for our deliberations. Seeing none, would Contract Planner John Rickenbaugh please present the report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'm John Rickenbach, and I'm going to be presenting this tonight. Just by way of background, it's not the first time the Planning Commission has heard similar type of hearing on other aspects of the Avila Ranch projects. Some of this is going to sound familiar, but I'll be able to provide some context as I go along. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the R1 product review, which is a portion of the Avila Ranch development plan. The recommendation tonight is to adopt the draft resolution before you approving the proposed site design and layout for the R1 component, the Avila Ranch project, to be developed within Phase 5 of the development plan, based on findings and subject to conditions of approval that were part of the originally proposed Avila Ranch project as approved by the City Council back in September 2017, as well as the mitigation measures that were included in the 2017 certified final EIR for the project. So the previous approvals associated with Avila Ranch started back in 2017. There was the development plan, a development agreement, the vesting tentative map that went with it, and the certified final EIR. Overall, the project at that time was found consistent with city policies, including the general plan and the airport area specific plan and community design guidelines. And that's why it's important tonight to understand that, in a sense, this project has already been pre-vetted by the general plan. It's a question of whether this is consistent with what was proposed within that approved project. The current review focuses on the design of the R1 component within the framework of those approvals. To provide a little context on where this is, within the city, you've got it down in the southwestern corner of the airport area specific plan, right in the heart of the Avila Ranch development plan, which you see right here in the middle. You had previously looked at the R2 portion, which on this map is just to the north and west across Tank Farm Creek from this area. The R1 area covers 12.8 acres of the 150-acre site. It would be developed with 101 homes total. It also includes 2.6 acres of public facility designated land for 2 parks. Also were consistent with what was approved back in 2017. Within the R1, there are 2 basic types of units, the alley-loaded units, the front-loaded units. Within each of those, there's two floor plans for the alley-loaded, 4 for the front-loaded. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but to show you these are project statistics, but with 2 floor plans and 4 floor plans for 2 different types of products, you have a lot of mixing and matching that's possible. You also have 3 different architectural styles, so you can imagine there's a lot of variety that could occur. We're talking about 1- and 2-story plans, ranging in size anywhere from 2 to 5 bedrooms, 2 to 3 car garages. And some of these could accommodate junior accessory dwelling units. I'm not going to go into detail here, although the applicant team does have a presentation, and they may want to speak to this, but I just want to show, we did go through the ARC and got input on the different architectural issues and styles, which they felt were quite good and appropriate. Just going to show a couple of slides, which the applicant will probably want to expand on if they choose to. But just to show front-loaded and alley-loaded units, I won't go into a lot of depth there. This table I only include to illustrate the point I made before. You have 6 different types of plans within 2 different types of units. You have 3 different types of architectural styles that are possible. And so you do have a variety of housing types. They all range generally around the 2,000 square foot range up to almost 2,500 square feet. Generally consistent with what we had anticipated in the development agreement, which I'll get into in a moment. This shows where the units would be located within the project relative to one another. The blue ones are the alley-loaded units. The orange ones, the front-loaded units. And again, you could have a variety of styles within each of those types. These are a couple of renderings, which I won't go into a lot of depth, but just to give you a bird's eye view of what you might expect to see. In this case, a view more or less from Jesperson Road looking into the development. You get a sense of what some of the landscape features might look like relative to the product and the density we're talking about here. Here, this looks at a pedestrian paseo that would be part of the project and how that would relate to housing. And here's another rendering. These are slides we spent some time on with ARC, and they were able to provide some input and actually ultimately support for what was presented. This isn't any different than what was presented to them. Now, there are a couple of things in here that are worth noting for Planning Commission's purposes. The Avila Ranch Development Plan, when it was proposed, did not anticipate every aspect of what development might occur. That is happening now. So as part of this, the applicant has proposed some clarifications to the standards that were approved. Generally speaking, clarifying standards that were not even there or addressed in the approved plan, just to provide some closure on a few key issues. For example, there's an added 15 to 20 foot setback standard for lots with side-on garages. There was no standard that was approved, and this is a way to actually, in a sense, make it clear what's going to be developed where before it wasn't. There's an added 10-foot setback for rear porches. There was no such standard before. And they've clarified the garage setback standards for non-front facing garages, which is to say 3 feet for alley access lots to acknowledge the narrowness of the alley. So these are all things that during the design process became important to consider and put into the proposal. ARC, as I said, looked at this back in June. They found the project was consistent with the design policies and guidelines of the Airport Area Specific Plan, the Development Plan, and Community Design Guidelines. They did make a couple of recommendations. They asked if it could be looked at to evaluate the size and functionality of some of the porches relative to how they actually function in the project, and to look at options to enhance the safety and connections for crossing the street to the bridge at Wright Brothers and Earhart Way. And just to show you where that is, that little knuckle up there, if you look at the roundabout in the upper right part, you just follow it to the left. You can see where the road turns hard to the left there. There's a way to get over there to the creek, Tank Farm Creek. And the question here is just to make sure that access to that area is safely designed. It's not that it really wasn't addressed before, but I think there's some clarification that ARC was asking for. And it is addressed, and the applicants will be able to speak to that if a question is raised on that. So addressing the recommendations, the applicant is prepared to work with city staff to address any design issues related to those recommendations. Notably, project condition 6, which is before you, states that public improvement plans for this shall include design strategies to facilitate pedestrian crossings where the bridge over Tank Farm Creek would connect at that point we've discussed. Final designs for that shall be to the satisfaction of the Public Works Director. In other words, they've got to work with city staff and Public Works to make sure that the design for safety is properly addressed. Now, there's a development agreement that covers the entirety of the Avila Ranch development, and it provides overarching project direction for everything within Avila Ranch. It provides key direction on the intent of the project, does allow some degree of flexibility in how you implement the project. It does provide performance standards to address energy use as well, and it works in conjunction with the development plan. This was approved back in 2017, and it's basically the cookbook that this project has to follow. I'll speak to the energy issues for a moment, because this is important, because the Avila Ranch Development Plan
said a lot of things, but since it was approved, the nature of how energy provisions are implemented has changed a bit. So this project is going to be addressing what are the updated energy requirements the city must follow, which aren't spelled out directly in the development plan, but just want to make sure you understand that if there's any deviation from that, it's to make things consistent with the way things are done in the city now. Within the development agreement, it does describe key performance goals, and it requires the equivalent of energy conservation that exceeds 2016 standards by 15%, and that the sustainability features are consistent with 2019 energy codes. And in the development plan, there's a discussion of how that would be done, and it focuses on net zero energy as a concept. But as I said, the California Energy Commission, subsequent to that, has made GHG emission reduction a top priority, not zero net energy. So that would allow for all electric development, for example, which is consistent with city goals, to reduce the GHG, greenhouse gas emissions. And that's what the project is intending to do, to comply with city requirements. The response to all that is that's what the applicant is going to be doing. All electric homes, many sustainability features, 19 to 30% above minimum code compliance, and consistent with the development agreement, which does allow some flexibility and establishes performance standards. The city's sustainability manager has reviewed all this and does support the project approach. Now, in terms of design, the Avila Ranch Development Plan includes standards related to site and building design, and again, the intent is to be consistent with the development agreement. The applicant's proposal for the R1 standards, as I say, is basically to follow the development plan, clarifying a few standards which I pointed out before. This is just a quick slide about the housing mix, just to show you what the development agreement says, what the development plan anticipates, and what is actually proposed. And they're all more or less in the range of about 2,000 square feet. Obviously, in the design, there's a little flexibility up and down that might be required to implement that, but what you gain from this is that the proposed development is consistent with the intent of the DA and the development plan. It's also consistent with the community design lines. The third bullet on here, I think I covered the first two already, and also consistent with the intent of the development plan in terms of setbacks, building heights, and lot sizes, which is spelled out in your agenda report. Now, I mentioned before there are parks, 2 parks here that would be included, totaling 2.6 acres. That was included, anticipated within the development plan that was approved, 2017. There is a condition that's included in here in response to some discussion from ARC and subsequent to that prior to occupancy of the first production unit in Phase 5, a park development phasing plan must be submitted for review and approval by the Parks Director and the Public Works Director. I bring this up because it wasn't clear to everyone when or how the parks were going to be implemented. But again, this has to be done in coordination with city staff as part of the development or occupancy of the first unit in this development. CEQA compliance. Well, the final EIR for the Avila Ranch project was certified back in 2017 for the entirety of the project. This project is consistent with the tentative map, the development agreement, development plan that were addressed in the final EIR. And because of that, the project is in substantial conformance with that EIR, so no further CEQA review is required. And I'll just conclude on this slide. Again, I won't reread it, but it's the recommendation to approve the project. And now I will hand it back to you, and the applicant is prepared to make a presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Do any commissioners have questions of staff? Vice Chair Khan.
Who's going to build the park?
The city is going to build the park. It is identified as a capital improvement program in the budget, and we're working towards this fiscal year beginning design work on that.
Thank you.
And I should say that we are collecting fees from the development to help support that cost.
Any other questions of staff? All right, I'm not seeing any, so we're ready for the applicant's presentation.
I may have misspoke, and so I'm actually going to turn that last question over to the applicant. And we have a lot of parks under construction, and I had a different park in mind specifically when you asked that question. because it's being asked quite a bit in a different subdivision, so my apologies.
I'm sure that's the case in some case, but not our case. We're happy that we're designing and building and maintaining the parks in our project.
We are too.
We're on the same page. I'm hoping you can hear me because this is a little, how's that? Is that okay? Can you hear me? You gotta be like right at it. No, right there. Is it on? I don't know. Just have to get closer to it. You have to talk right into it. Sorry. Heck being short. So thanks, John. That was actually really comprehensive. What John didn't tell you, he's been with this project since its inception. So although I feel like I know everything about this, probably John knows more than I do. So we work together to make sure that all of you know what we know, if you will. So thanks for that. Good evening, Chair Quincy, members of the commission. It's been a year since we were before you, some of you, and so I just want to give a hearty welcome to those that I have not appeared before, and thank you very much for your service to the community. I am Carol Florence. I'm a principal planner with Oasis Associates, and I'm here proudly representing the applicant, Wathen Castanos Homes. I actually am accompanied tonight, and maybe they can raise their hand because they're behind me, by Dan Garson, who's the Director of Land Development. We just say ground when we talk about Dan. And Justin Allison, who's the Director of Construction. And when we talk about Justin, we just say vertical, so everyone knows what we're talking about. This evening, the project architect, Michael Stone, is with me. He's the associate and senior designer with Bassani and Lagoni. And the two of us will be doing a little tag team up here. So maybe this mic's gonna go up and down. I'll just talk louder. Okay, there we go. So I just want to respectfully request, let's see if I can get this right. Maybe. I don't know. Let's see, did that do it? No, that is full screen. I'm sorry, can I give this back so you can fix it for me? Sure. Sorry, technical difficulty. Just let John drive it. Yeah, maybe. I can go next? Okay. So at any rate, I respectfully request that the Planning Commission adopt the resolution that is approving the site design and layout for the 101 residential single-family units within Phase 5. And that is based upon the findings, quite obviously, but also the 130 conditions of approval, the 84 mitigation measures, and the new 8 additional conditions of approval that are actually very specific to Phase 5. So that was that next slide. There we go. Hit that arrow up in the corner. So maybe you want to raise it up a little or something. Brian, there we go. Okay. So while our team has been diligently working toward compliance with those conditions and mitigation measures, and of course, working under the guidance of the Airport Area Specific Plan and our development plan and the community design guidelines, we are actually really happy and thrilled to be here this evening. I do hope you had an opportunity to look at our project booklet. There's a lot of information in there, so Michael and I are just going to hit the highlights for you tonight. And you know, before I move on in the presentation, I just really want to thank Michael and his staff, who has worked many, many years with the previous owner, many, many years with Wathen Castanos, and as you can imagine, this is a very lengthy project. They're not tired of us, hopefully we're not tired of them, but I want to tell you it's truly a collaboration. There's a lot of give and take. As you can imagine, there's a lot of details to deal with. So we meet often, consistently, and iron out those details as needed. So I do appreciate that. So by way of history, the Planning Commission made their final recommendation on this project to the City Council 5 years ago to this month, so August of 2017. And it was in August of last year that the ARC and the Planning Commission reviewed the R2 product, and currently we are constructing Phase 1 of that R2 product. So I think next slide. Thank you. So I'm just going to say a bit about the policies that are surrounding how Phase 5 was able to move forward, since typically you go sequentially. We really started out looking at trying to go sequentially from 1 to 5, but wanted to bring different products to the market sooner. So John mentioned the development agreement, and really, if you know anything about that, it's a contract between Wath and Castanos and the city, and it gives essentially overarching guidance and provides the framework for both parties and the obligations, quite obviously, for both parties. So section 6.01, and these are the things that I know that Marky loves, are all of these legal things. But what 6.1 basically is the backbone infrastructure, and it gives us the flexibility that we have taken an opportunity here to move the sequences around a bit. So it's based on that enabling language in the development agreement and Wathen's desire to move other products forward, that the city and Wathen worked on a memorandum of agreement, and that essentially laid out the obligations for construction of public improvements that were designed again sequentially, but we needed to bring some forward in order to go from phase 5 to, from phase 1 to phase 5. And those are addressed in the 4 utility conditions of approval, and I believe 11 transportation conditions of approval. And they range anywhere from the recycled water line that's going to be in Vachel Lane to the Buckley Road extension, which if you've been near the site, close to the site, you can see that that's almost complete. So speaking, next slide please. Speaking of policy items, bringing forward the city's energy policy, was a key component of this project, because we really were able to work together. They were kind of in their infancy, and so we had an opportunity to see how they would impact the project itself and work together. And I think we did a great job, frankly, doing that. So I think in your packet you may have the energy guidelines that we put forward for the R2 product. Those have been modified slightly for the Phase 5 R1 single family, but they continue to include things like all electric homes, increased sizing of the photovoltaic panels, its compliance with LEED ND, and also the Green Point ratings. And one of my favorites, there's a $750 voucher toward an e-bike, which I like the e-bike, but I even like the fact, even better, this at a local bike shop on Foothill Cyclery, so yay about that. So this next slide, again, is the overall project. It's a 6-phased project. This highlights the R1 front load and alley load homes. There are 720 homes in all. 101 of those are in Phase 5, 79 are the front load, and 22 are the alley load. And some of the highlights in the Phase 5 that John may have mentioned, we have 2 parks, H&I. There's going to be a bridge connection to Phase 2. You can, I don't know if John can show that there. And that is to Park D, and then there's a multi-purpose trail as well, as you can see along the creek. So I'm going to hand this over to Michael for a moment.
Next slide. John briefly hinted at the architecture. We're quickly going to elaborate on it without, again, getting into too much detail. But these 2 street scenes show the general character of the architectural styles. We have the 2 elevations, or 2 plans, I should say, for the alley load across the bottom. And then the front load is across the top along Hughes Lane. And each of the street scenes shows the mixture of elevation styles. That's Spanish, the Craftsman, and the Farmhouse. The Spanish is more of a transitional Spanish, some cleaner lines and simpler massing, kind of more in today's market versus what you would see in the historical Spanish style. You'll see kind of variations in massing. And I do want to point out, on the top street scene, 2 houses in from the left, we have a pedestrian paseo that runs through. And the bottom street scene, we got the paseo 2 houses in from the right. And then going to the next slide. This is the rendering that was brought up earlier. This is on Doolittle Drive across from Park I. So you're looking at the front load product. You can see that pedestrian paseo kind of coming through where there's a change in paving along the street, kind of between the houses right in the middle. I do want to kind of highlight that you have the varying setbacks and then different front porches, of course, per elevation style all the way through, but you can see a great mix and variation of massing and looks for each of the homes. Next slide.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say, and speaking of porches, there are 3 ARC comments that were made that we're bringing forward to you this evening. One is the utility of the front porches. I did? Okay, I'll stop now. No.
You can go ahead and keep going. There was some hiccups there in the
Okay, thanks.
part.
The utility of the front porches, paving in the alleyways, and then a pedestrian crosswalk to the bridge that spans Tank Farm Creek. So I think next slide will be helpful. Oh, that
Oh,
other
it's
slide.
okay.
It was
They're-
okay, you
they're
can go.
showing the same
The same thing.
So the first slide that was up before, you guys probably glanced at it, that was the alley load product. Basically just showing how the porches work. Obviously, as I mentioned, the front porches are kind of different for each elevation design and how the character of the house plays out. The farmhouse, you have kind of a wider porch across the front of the house. On the Spanish, in particular, that plan too, it's more of the box entry at the front. But in either case, there's plenty of coverage for someone to come into the front door out of the elements and kind of hang out without being obstructed or in the elements. On the next slide, we'll show the front load product. And you can see the one on the left for the plan 2. It's a fairly deep porch, again, trying to engage kind of that walkable aspect of the site. So whether the homeowner chooses to put furniture out there or do something different, there's plenty of space for them on that one. And then the plan 4 is actually a plan that doesn't necessarily have a front porch towards the street in the standard plan, but at the JADU option, you get that front porch when we do have living forward versus the garage. So there's kind of an inherent built-in aspect to increase variation and activity across the site there.
So I think this next slide has to do with, there were 2 other comments the ARC made. One had to do with paving materials in the alley, and I just bring forward the conditions. So there are 2 conditions, 2 comments from the ARC that we'll be working with staff on. One of them is this, because it's really a design component, so we're trying to balance a number of things, grading and drainage, of course, aesthetics. So we look forward to doing that. And then the next slide really is the pedestrian crossing, and I was alluded to the bridge across Tank Farm Creek. And we are going to be working with staff to try to locate an appropriate crosswalk, which there wasn't one right there in that bulb out, and it probably won't be where that arrow is now, but those are the things that the ARC brought forward. So I just am hoping, other than these technical concerns, that you can appreciate we have tried really, really hard to make this a super pedestrian and bike friendly community, and there is just tons and tons of connectivity. This will happen. Next.
So, speaking of the walkable, you have the paseo here. This perspective, John showed up earlier, so I'll kind of just hit it. It shows the alley load. So you have the front doors with their courtyards for each of the alley load plans. They all have their own private courtyards. And then this backs up to the front load product, which would be just off to the right. So you have a rear yard fence that's just barely showing on the right side of that image. And then you can see that paseo that's running between the 2 products in the key plan. Then on the next slide, this one's kind of from the project entry, showing more of a community view. As John mentioned, it shows Park H, and Park H is more of that community park where you got the amphitheaters, some exercise things, more of a community interaction park.
Gardens.
And so we wanted to highlight how that paseo across the front of those alley load products is really fronting onto the park and really engaging that interaction that Carol was mentioning before. You'll notice we do have a 2-story house kind of coming in, but there's a single-story edge that comes to it, and then we have a single-story house to the back. So it was thought about as to to how that feels on the entry and kind of making a statement with the first house and then softening it as you come around into the community all the way through.
Next slide, please, thanks. You're up.
John mentioned a number of variations we have, so real quick, we got 6 floor plans across the site, 3 architectural styles for each, and 12 different color schemes. So to put a number to that, there's 72 different variations, providing plenty of unique identification for each homeowner, or an individuality, if you will, for the homeowners throughout the community.
Thanks. Next slide, thanks. I'll go quickly through this, but I did want to give you an overview of what's happening on the site and what's going to be happening on the site. There was a tremendous amount of not only on-site improvements, but off-site improvements. And I think a lot of these will resonate with you because they're traffic-related and street-related. So we will be extending Buckley Road through to South Highgare, and if you've been down there, you can almost get through there, and we're going to end up doing that by the end of this month. We're going to widen Buckley so that we can add bike lanes to that. We've completed a number of improvements at Tank Farm and Highgara and South, Phase 1 of the suburban road improvement, and then the widening of Vachel. And speaking of Vachel and Highgara, you know how difficult it is to turn left in, left out. Well, you won't be able to once Buckley Road extends to South Highgara, so that will be a much safer intersection. So, and then, of course, the top right picture there is the multi-purpose trail, which I'm a real fan of, so I think that will be great. From a home construction standpoint, we currently have 6 model homes under construction and 22 production homes, and so those model homes will be open at the end of this month. I would encourage you to come out and take a look at those. We also anticipate those production homes being occupied shortly thereafter. And what's really interesting and was really staggering, really, that we have 2,000 people on an interest list at this point. So you can only imagine we're pretty happy about that. So that really does conclude our presentation. I want to thank you for your time this evening. My entire team is here to address any of your questions or comments, and we look forward to your approval. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Do any commissioners have questions of the applicant?
One simple question. Why are you having an interim fire department? Where's it going to go? And when's it going to go away?
That was, if you will, baked into the project early on. We're responsible for that. We just discovered the notes from previous discussions with the fire department. So it's interim, I suppose, until it's not interim.
Yeah, the city would probably have to answer that.
Yeah.
Well, I'll start and let Michael fill in, because he really knows better than I do. But yes, the origin of that is that before any of the development had been contemplated, there was a recognition that there wasn't sufficient fire service in the south end of town. And there was a long-range plan to build a permanent fire station somewhere. But because this project was coming forward in 2016 and 17 without the benefit of knowing where that would be, the applicant at the time said, we'll build an interim station if there's an issue.
Okay.
And that's what they're going to do. There is a question right now whether that's necessary if there's going to be the potential for a permanent station. Depends on the timing. But there's a willingness and there's a site and the city has control of that. It's a question of how that gets rolled out.
Okay.
Is that about right? Okay.
Yeah, and I would
Thank
just
you.
say that we're committed to do it, so
Yeah,
whatever.
I was just
happens.
curious.
Yeah.
And then as another comment, why I asked about the park timing, I live out in Edna Islay over by Vaughn's in Broad Street, and there's French Park out there, and I bought in '89, and I had a young kid, and the park wasn't built. My kid wanted a park to play in. He was running around with dirt lot on dirt French Park, so anyway.
And ergo, the requirement that we bring forward our phasing plan for the parks, but
Right.
they are part and parcel to the housing development, so it only
Perfect.
makes sense that we build them concurrently.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Commissioner Francis?
Just a quick follow-up on the fire station question. I was wondering when that is supposed to be completed, the interim fire station.
The requirement is when 50% of the units are constructed.
So it wouldn't be a set date, it would just be based on the timeline of actual development?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a few years off, based on the last discussion and calculation.
Commissioner Jorgensen.
Could you just give us a little bit of an overview of connectivity of this project, especially since Phase 5 is kind of moving up a little bit, and in some ways this is more outfill than infill until things are developed. But Jefferson and the connections all the way to suburban, for instance, and ways for people to get in and out without just going down Buckley and out Vachel. And of course, the bike path along Buckley has a whole set of issues to be completed. But when you're moving to Phase 5 in the way you are people going to still be pretty isolated here, or where do we see these connections?
So,
being
good
done?
question, and the applicant team might want to answer a little bit behind me, but the idea is Phase 5, part of the reason why we're able to go forward with Phase 5 or 4 or anything out of order, which was another action that was vetted through Planning Commission and ultimately Council, was that for that to occur, all infrastructure, including connections, roadways, infrastructure that would have been required up to that point have to be done and put in place before that happens. So it's not as if this is going to be isolated. You're going to have to be able to connect through, obviously on Buckley, Vachel, those improvements. And the idea being ultimately, you're going to see the entirety of the development. And I can't remember exactly the order of phasing, but the phasing that has to occur through Phase 5, or the infrastructure needs to be in place. The only phase beyond that would be the commercial piece and the piece that goes off to the east a little bit, which again, I can look up the details, but I know that that's part of the thinking here. And Carol, I don't know if you have it, want to speak to that, or Dan? Sure.
Good evening, Commissioners. Dan Garson, Director of Land Development for Watkins-Stanos. So with respect to Phase 5, its connectivity to the community at large is via Buckley and Jesperson. And then, as you may know, we have a connectivity Jesperson all the way up to Horizon that will also connect to Suburban. So all that looping is done, and as part of the memorandum of understanding, or the memorandum to advance Phases 4 and 5, we agreed that we would advance those off-site improvements in certain stages to make sure that nobody was on an island. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Francis?
Just a quick question on the Tank Farm Creek, and I know we were talking quite a bit about that central crossing. Is that aligning with the crossing that's currently out there in the field?
The current crossing across the creek is a temporary old ag crossing.
Okay,
It will be demolished.
okay,
There are two proposed crossings, one on your map just adjacent to Park A.
okay,
That will be built as we build Phase 5 in detail, along with that bike trail. And then the connection at the corner of Earhart and Wright Brothers will be built either with Phase 2 and 3 or with Phase 5, whichever goes first.
I was really impressed by that multi-use trail, and so that frontage along Buckley will be completed as Phase 5 is completed? All of that will be in place? Is that?
I'm just trying to think carefully here. The Buckley widening is a project in and of itself.
Right.
The bike trail adjacent to it, that non-connected one, is a project unto itself, and it's either a Phase 5 or Phase 6. I apologize, I don't recall exactly on that one.
Thank you.
But it is timed with that. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I'll stay close.
Any other commissioners have questions? Seeing none? Ms. Florence?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for your considered deliberation tonight and hopefully for your approval. But I would encourage you, it's one thing to sit at the dais and listen to all of us yammer and show pictures of it, but we're up and out of the ground. The moon rocks are growing. So I would encourage you, especially now that we'll have models open, to come out It'll make a lot more sense when you actually see it in 3D, if you will. So, and if you want a private tour, just call me and I'll take you on one. But thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. Deputy City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
No, Chair, I haven't received any questions or requests to speak. Sorry.
Okay, we'll bring it back for deliberations. Can we start with a motion in a second? Well, it doesn't look like we can.
I'll make a motion. I'm recommending that they adopt the draft resolution approving the R1 portion Phase 5 of Avila Ranch project based on findings and subject to conditions of approval. And I'd just like to add a comment to that motion that I have visited the site like Carol talked about, and I'm very impressed with it. And I'm very impressed with the creek path and the pedestrian corridors, and I think it seems like it's shaping up to be a nice project. And I'm very pleased that they're extending Buckley Road to South Higuera. That's a huge improvement. I used to, in the 80s, I had to work for a company off of Buckley Road, and that one turn there by the airport, there's a very bad accident there. It's a dangerous road, and so that extension is very good. So that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any deliberations from other commissioners or any comments?
I was just going to say that I was also shared your concerns about connectivity and isolation and the outfill versus infill. But after spending a better part of an afternoon out at the site and really walking the multi-use trail and seeing the connectivity over to suburban, was really impressed with the thoughtfulness that's been put into creating a super walkable community that really actually felt like a community. The parks were incredibly thoughtful, and it seemed like there's a lot of attention put to bringing people together and kind of giving that, well, connectivity between people and not just the neighborhood. So I was impressed by that. Thank you.
Any other comments? All right, we have a motion and a second, so Deputy City Clerk, can you please call roll?
Vice Chair Khan,
Yes.
Commissioner Jorgensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Francis,
Yes.
that was a yes from Commissioner Francis. Commissioner Hopkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Munoz Morris,
Yes.
and Chair Quincy.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
Thank you. We'll see you again.
All right.
You'll be back.
All right, moving on to our final item. The public hearing item before us is to review the revised project design. Well, actually, I'll take a moment. Does anyone need a break? Do it? You guys good too? Okay. So the last item before us is a public item to review the revised project design for the Motel Inn located at 1531 Monterey Street. Do any commissioners have ex parte communications to disclose? All right, seeing none, would Assistant Planner Walter Otzel please present the report?
Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. I'm Brian Lavelle, Senior Planner in Community
Sorry.
Development. Just a few comments here before we get into this. On this item, staff is recommending that the Commission go ahead and hear the item, listen to the presentations from the applicant and from staff, take any public testimony, but then staff's recommending that the Planning Commission continue the item. The reason for that is that staff received a rather lengthy agenda correspondence that was provided on behalf of the Southwest Carpenters Union that raises some issues with the environmental review that was previously done and the addendum that's been prepared for the project. A continuance would allow staff time to address the issues in detail and perform any necessary additional technical or environmental analysis that may be needed. But the Planning Commission's feedback at this time on the project would be really helpful for the applicant and staff. And I'm happy to answer any more questions on that part of it.
Yeah, I have a procedural question on that. So when we come back, then will the presentation basically happen a second time? How does that work?
I think what we could expect is a brief update, just a recap of the project, presuming that no significant changes are made to the project, and then an update on any necessary responses, if there even needs to be, to the agenda correspondence, and then if needed, you'd also be seeing some additional environmental analysis.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just, thank you, Brian, for making that explanation, and I'll just say, that it's, typically it's our practice that when comments are made on an environmental document that we provide, a full response, and just with the late information that's been submitted, we don't have the ability to do that. And so getting a read from the Planning Commission on the project, I think would be very helpful both to staff and the applicant. And then following this meeting, staff will evaluate more closely what assertions are made as to, the status of the environmental document, and we'll come back with a recommendation then to the Planning Commission.
So I guess maybe I should ask my fellow commissioners if everyone's on board with that. So maybe we can just do a basic straw poll. Commissioner Hopkins?
Yeah, I'm supportive of that approach.
Okay. Commissioner Munoz-Morris? Vice Chair Khan? I'm good with that. Everyone's good with that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and proceed then.
Okay, very good. Chair Quincy, good evening, and commissioners. Hello again. The item before you is architectural review of a revised design for the Motel Inn project, which is, of course, a hotel development on the site of the former Milestone Motel Inn at the northerly end of Monterey Street. In 2017, the development of the motel site was considered and approved by the Planning Commission, with guest rooms in bungalows on the western portion of the site and recreational vehicle camping sites to the east, which hosted guest accommodations in pre-installed Airstream trailers. A revised project design was presented last year under this application. The Mission Revival style bungalows would be replaced by A-frame style guest rooms, and the larger guest room building behind the restaurant was eliminated. The Cultural Heritage Committee reviewed the A-frame design and found that these buildings did not preserve the essential form and integrity of this historic property as represented by the Mission Revival style remnants of the original Motel Inn, and continued consideration of this application with guidance to the applicant. And the design was further revised in response to the committee's direction, with the A-frames eliminated and the Mission Revival bungalow guest rooms added back and also carried throughout the project, replacing the Airstream trailer sites on the eastern portion of the property with single-story bungalows that you can see in this slide in the eastern area labeled Parcel 3 there. In addition, a sound wall has been added to the eastern side of the site at its boundary with Highway 101 to provide additional noise attenuation to enhance the guest experience. The revised design was well received by the Cultural Heritage Committee, which recommended it be found consistent with standard guidelines and policies for cultural preservation, and by the Architecture Review Commission, who recommended it be found consistent with applicable design standards. In the way of orientation, it's a commercial parcel just over 4 acres in size at the south side of Monterey Street at its northerly end, where it leads to the on-ramps for the northbound lanes of Highway 101. It was developed in the late 20s with the Milestone Motel Inn, which was a hotel catering to guests traveling by automobiles, with lodgings and bungalow units arranged around a central courtyard. The property has been included in the city's inventory of historic resources since the first Historic Resources Survey in 1983, and the original bungalow buildings were eventually demolished due to significant alteration and extensive deterioration. Today, only a portion of the restaurant facade, along with the bell tower lobby building, remain as remnants of the original construction, and reminders of its Mission Revival architectural style. As already noted, the applicant intends to develop the property with a hotel, proposing under this current design 83 guest rooms in 29 Mission Revival style bungalow buildings, along with 4 accessory housekeeping and maintenance buildings, and a restaurant and lobby at the front of the site. And the restaurant and lobby building incorporate remnants of the original Motel Inn, and this component of the project remains essentially unrevised from its approved design. It's not part of this design revision. So with that, and as described in the staff report, the major focus of review on this design revision would be its consistency with general plan policies, with development standards set out in zoning regulations, and conformance with provisions of ordinances 1130 adopted in 1989 and then amended by ordinance 1651 in 2018. Those ordinances address land use compatibility between residential and non-residential land uses adjacent to the San Luis Obispo Creek in this zone. So we note that the proposed use of the property remains as guest accommodations, that hotels are permitted use within the tourist commercial area and zone, and are particularly appropriate along Upper Monterey as stated in the land use element of the general plan. Protection to residential neighborhoods near this area and protection to the creek, which travels along the southern and eastern boundary of the site, are also important policy considerations. And they are largely addressed by the provisions of ordinances 1113 and 1651, which we'll describe in a little more detail later in this presentation. So the project's conformance to development standards set out in zoning regulations, such as setbacks, lot coverage, building height, and parking requirements, are noted and detailed in the staff report, and including a requested exception from fence and wall height limits to accommodate a taller sound wall for noise attenuation to enhance the guest experience. So moving on to the wall, the sound wall is situated along the boundary adjacent to the freeway and is proposed as a noise mitigating amenity for the hotel. Although it provides noise attenuation for the hotel guests, it's not a feature that's required in order to achieve appropriate noise exposure limits on the property. Normally, walls are limited to 8 feet in height in a case like this, but exceptions are possible under certain circumstances. And here, following the conclusions of an acoustic study, the applicant has elected to propose a 16-foot height to provide the greatest noise attenuation for reducing the noise emanating from the adjacent freeway. The wall is given a vegetated screen with climbing vines, and as depicted in photo simulations, takes advantage of a moderate grade differential to minimize its visibility from the freeway. Additionally, Ordinance 1130 was adopted in 1989 to address special considerations regarding land use compatibility, particularly between commercial and residential development adjacent to the creek, such as that along San Luis Drive behind the site across the creek channel. This ordinance was amended by Ordinance 1651 in 2018, with the amending ordinance providing specific criteria for development in this area, focused on screening and buffering between the commercial and residential areas, and a more restrictive building height as you approach the creek corridor in addition to the creek setback provisions. These ordinances were provided as attachments in the staff report for this item. In summary, the revised project does remain consistent with these criteria, continuing to provide the required creek setback and proposing no creekside trails, orienting bungalows internally toward courtyard features without exposing any building entries south toward the creek, and limiting openings toward the creek to a small number of windows that are treated with anti-glare tint. Activity and gathering areas are kept internal to the site, and as with the approved design, fencing, building, and landscaping are maintained as screening buffers between the creek and the activity and parking areas on the site. And although a small meeting room is provided as a hotel amenity, there are no conference or convention center facilities proposed with this hotel. And as mentioned, the revision was seen to be consistent, substantially consistent with that considered under the initial study adopted for the project, with the changes being primarily architectural in nature. They are not seen to result in a change of use from tourist accommodations or a significant intensification in scale, since there's really only a marginally increase from 81 to 83 guest room accommodations. An addendum to the initial study was prepared, but as you have heard, there will be time to look more closely into that addendum in response to the recently received correspondence. So with that, the commission is asked to consider whether the project as revised is consistent with applicable policy standards and guidelines. And staff is recommending that the condition receive this presentation, providing feedback, and continue the item to a future date to allow additional time for the review of the environmental documentation as mentioned. Alternatively, the commission could decide to deny approval of the design revisions based on specific findings of inconsistency with relevant policy standards or guidelines. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time. The applicant team is present to provide additional details about the revised project design, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have of staff. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess before the applicant presents, do commissioners have any questions that might highlight issues the applicant can address? No? Okay.
Good evening. I'm Ariana Melendez, Studio Design Group, Project Architect, and this is Damian Mavis from Covalop, the owner applicant of the property. I'll wait a moment here. Thank you. Yeah, you can. Thanks. So we're returning with a modified application on this property. It was previously entitled in 2017. There were some programming changes leading to design revisions that we believe actually enhanced the project, so we're excited to show those to you today. Just for some context, here is a recent photo of the structures that remain on the site on the left-hand side. Those are the historic structures, and then some older photos showing what it was back in the day. Go ahead, next slide, please. This slide is included for reference. This was the site plan that was entitled back in 2017. It had a series of two-story bungalows on the western side of the site arranged around a court. And then there was a lobby building, two-story lobby building with guest rooms incorporated in that building in the Y shape, thank you. And then the pool also in that central court. And then the eastern side of the site that's more exposed to the freeway, was planned for Airstream Park and some parking. Go ahead and next slide, please. And then did you want to sit in on this one?
Hi. My name is Damian Mavis with Covalop. We're the project applicant. So this slide was the 2021 CHC submittal, and it basically replaced the stick-built bungalows with prefabricated A-frames. This was done during the pandemic to adjust kind of the target market to a little more cost-conscious, younger demographic to make the build more economical. The feedback from CHC wasn't positive. They felt that the architecture clashed with the original architecture of the Motel Inn. Next slide. So we really, with that, reevaluated our position in the market, watched COVID kind of continue to unfold and its associated effects on the hospitality industry. As time went on, a couple of new hotels in SLO gained momentum. It was pretty clear that a slightly more upscale hotel would work out in this market. Then really at that point, two things converged. We came across several bungalow courts that had been converted to hotel uses, so that's kind of defined a series of small houses arranged around a central garden. And it echoed the same architecture and period of the Motel Inn. Some of these successful conversions you could literally pick up and put on the Motel Inn site, and it would look like it had been there since the beginning. So then, lo and behold, researching the origins of the bungalow court concept, we come to find that really the fathers of this concept, which started in Pasadena, were Arthur and Alfred Heinemann, who of course designed and built the Motel Inn. So we decided to eliminate the airstreams in favor of a number of single and two-story bungalows using the traditional ratios of scale and layout to some of their best examples of the Heinemann's design in Pasadena. So we didn't really copy them, but we used them for inspiration. And so we did two things. We enhanced the kind of radial arrangement of the two-story bungalows around the pool area on the west side, and then arranged the others on the east side around the axis heading towards the east. So we presented what you see here to CHC and ARC. I think it went really well. And with that, I'll let Ariana complete the presentation.
Hi, thank you. So on the western side of the site, those two-story bungalows are very similar to what was originally entitled. The lobby building has been replaced with an additional 5 two-story bungalows. And that's in part because the building, the historic building in front, will now incorporate the lobby. So that's no longer a use that's required to be elsewhere on site. And then, of course, as Damien mentioned, the east side of the site is the main change here, where we have the majority of those. I think there's 14 single-story bungalows, and then there's the bungalow at the end has a small two-story element just to create a sense of closure to that court there. Go ahead and next slide, please. The two-story bungalows, again, are very similar to what was originally entitled. These are Mission Revival style, smooth stucco iron railings, clay tile roofs, and recessed windows here. Go ahead, next slide, please. And these are the additional one-story bungalows that have been added to the project, also in keeping with that same style. There's a few variations to the facades, so as you walk down the court, there'll be some change in the design. And next slide, please. And as mentioned, the historic structure in front is not a part of this application, but we're showing it here for reference. The 2 elements that are existing will be incorporated, and then a single story will be infilled in between. And that will house the lobby, a small cafe, and a small meeting room. Go ahead and last slide, please. And with the addition of these one-story bungalows and the enhanced guest experience, higher room rates that the applicant is looking for, we added a sound wall along the freeway. Of course, we previously had the Airstreams on that side of the site, so this is a change in design based on that new program there. The sound wall is planned to be between 12 and 16 feet tall. Please note that's from the Motel inside grades, which are approximately 12 feet below the 101 freeway. So from the freeway side, we essentially have a 4-foot tall wall. There's also very dense foliage that exists currently. There's a significant buffer there in between the freeway and the Motel and property line where this wall will be built, which actually screens the wall pretty effective, or will screen the wall pretty effectively. And then the wall will have some additional planting on top of it. So there's some views here from the freeway showing an approximate height, and you can see the planting that exists there now. And then on the site plan there, you can see where the wall starts is actually past the historic structure, so any views of that historic structure won't be obstructed by this new wall. So that concludes our presentation. Please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, both of you. So I guess I'd first ask, is there any questions of the applicant?
There's also a public comment. I just want to remind you.
Yeah. Do we have any questions of the applicant?
I just have one comment on the design. First of all, in general, I like the design, I like what you've done. I actually was in there in the 80s and actually had to drink at the bar at the old, where the bar was. I don't even know which building it was in, but a little funky bar. I'm a swimmer, and so whenever I go to motels or hotels, I always like to swim laps, and I see that your pool is proposed to be 42 feet long. I'm not going to propose a condition or anything of the sort. I'm just making a suggestion that if you made it 50 feet long and good enough for lap swimming, you'd probably get some of your tenants in there swimming in the morning, so give them an outlet of some recreation. So this is merely a comment. Thank you very much.
So do we have any questions? Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to go back to the sound wall a little bit to understand a little more. So you've produced an acoustic study of the site?
Yes, we had 45 dB, it's acoustic consultant, do run scenarios regarding noise attenuation from, I think, 8 feet to 16 feet tall.
Did the consultant monitor as far as the single-family residence on the other side of the creek, or was this all, entirely in your property?
It was entirely on the site. There's a pretty good example in town on Brizolera Street of a 16-foot tall sound wall, and as you're right against the freeway.
Against the freeway.
And as you're driving on the freeway, you can kind of look over to the right, and it's relatively obscured by dense foliage. And we actually have a little bit of a higher height difference from the freeway surface to the base of the wall than exists on Brizolera. So it would look shorter than the wall on Brizolera.
And how will the wall look from the bungalows, let's say?
So this view number 1 up here in the upper right-hand corner, the lower arrow points to a story pole, a stick there, that is, I think we put it at, about 12 feet there. So that's kind of the view that you would see. And it would be stuccoed and landscaped. I mean, we want this to be a positive feature to the guest experience, not look like a freeway sound wall from either side.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Commissioner Munoz-Morris.
Yeah, just a quick question, I guess, just to be picky. And looking at the easternmost part of the project here, I imagine the answer is mostly to do with just kind of the site layout, but was there any consideration about the distance between, let's say, the furthest parking spot and your easternmost bungalow? Like, how long of a walking distance is that roughly, do you know?
I don't have specific distances, but we did go out to the site several times and walked, because that was something that was brought up, and walked the site and kind of compared it to other hotels, and I don't think it will be very impactful.
Okay.
But we shared your concern.
Yeah, I just want to mention too, all of the paths are designed for carts for any guests who need that accommodation too.
Right, thanks.
Commissioner Francis?
It's kind of a side question, but are the trees that are currently marked and wrapped out on the site, are those intended to be retained? Kind of the more substantial trees that are out there?
We have a tree plan that shows the ones that are going to be retained. I don't think the ones that are wrapped have any significance in terms of if they'll be saved or not.
Thank you.
Deputy City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
Yes, Chair, I received a comment slip from Jim D'Antona.
Good evening, Jim D'Antona, President and CEO of the San Luis Obispo Chamber of Commerce. I had no intention of commenting tonight. until I heard the late correspondence. So the slow chamber does not take an individual position on any project. But what we do in our vision talk about is a certain and definite process for projects to be considered. This late correspondence is just a tactic to abuse CEQA. Staff always does amazing work on their environmental reviews. They're gonna go back and find that there was nothing different, and then we're gonna have a decision on this. And then, at that point, Southwest, of course, will then appeal to the city council. What I think you can do tonight is you can actually, the one thing I think staff left off, they said you could deny it, you could continue it, you can actually approve it too, and make your modifications or suggestions, or do a continuation, but don't do it based on the late correspondence. I've been in land use for 15, 20 years, and all what was submitted was a tactic. I would say this is great work that's being done to revitalize our city, and all this extra time is gonna do is delay the work that we need to do. So I would say continue the questions you have, whichever way you're going to find, but I would say this correspondence, staff could go back and do that, but they also submitted already all these documents to you that had already considered the issues that the late correspondence deals with. And to that, you could accept the findings in CEQA, make the decision however you will make the decision, and then if Southwest Carpenters does not like that, they can then appeal it. And again, same issues would already be addressed and come forward to the city council. That's all I have for you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other public comment?
No, we do not.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the commission for deliberations and comments and guidance. You know, it strikes me as maybe the best route here would to first take a vote on whether we would like to continue this matter. And then maybe it makes sense after that, if we do, to provide guidance to the applicant. So do we have a motion and a second regarding the continuance? Or a question? Yeah, good.
So my question, I think, would be directed to staff here on the nature of what the hesitation was. If there was just not sufficient time to know if there was something that needed to be reevaluated, or if there was a specific thing that needed to be reassessed and responded to.
I'm going to, based on what I've read so far of the correspondence, it's just a matter of time. You know, there are a couple components to the letter that was submitted. One that specifically talks about use of local workforce, which is something that the city council has been very engaged in evaluating, you know, what we can do as a jurisdiction to require labor agreements and other considerations for local workforce. And so I'm confident that the city is working through that process appropriately, and that we don't have standards that we can apply to individual projects that come through in that manner. So that's not a section of the correspondence that I think is relevant to decision-making this evening. There's the second section that says that the city should prepare an environmental impact report for the project, and there are a variety. I haven't been able to get through in detail every section, but one of them is that the project is likely to cause significant air quality, noise, and GHG, greenhouse gas emissions impacts. So I'm confident that we evaluated this issue correctly in 2016, and what we will take the time to do is understand whether or not there were any changes either in the regulatory structure to the project, et cetera, that would suggest that we need to do more work in that area before bringing a recommendation back.
Thank you for that explanation, and I'm also glad you brought up the labor portion. I know that there isn't anything currently as part of our general plan that would apply to this particular project, but I hope that the city does look at potentially having some size regulations for these types of projects and bringing in local labor. And so for the GHG impacts, that'll just require looking at what has happened in the interim 5 years as far as any regulations. Is that my understanding?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and, we've seen this before too, in terms of the public testimony, identifying this as a tactic, and it's, we can evaluate this, we can even make changes, we can come back, and at that next hearing, there could very well be another letter identifying issues that cause us to recommend a continuance. And so generally what happens here is we ask, that the applicant reach out to the person who sent the letter and talk through those issues and see whether some agreement can be resolved before it comes back before the Planning Commission for decision.
I had some follow-up on that question. So is it, I guess, the city's position that a continuance would be in the best interest of the project? Because if we weren't to do that, it would open the grounds for a legal challenge to this?
Yeah, so I think it's in both the project's best interest and the city's best interest. Just, CEQA is built and depends on what's in the record. And as Michael opened with, it is our practice to come before the Planning Commission or the City Council with thorough responses to issues raised like this. And given the timing in which we received this, staff just didn't have adequate time or information to present to you that would give you and ourselves the level of confidence we needed that everything was good and there was no further environmental review that needed to be done.
Thank you for that, and maybe you can elaborate. How do we prevent it though from happening every time we come here?
Well, not it doesn't happen every time you come here. There's been.
Well, you just said there's a possibility that
for this project?
Yeah, for the next.
So what I suggested was that if the Planning Commission continues the project tonight, that gives some opportunity for the project proponents, the applicants, to reach out to the folks who authored this letter and have a conversation about whether any, resolution is possible. If that doesn't happen, we will tighten up our documents to the greatest extent possible. I mean, when a legal threat is made, then we, respond to that, and we will come back, anticipating what further issues could be raised, and we'll have done that work for the Planning Commission at that point in time. So this is a little bit unexpected. We haven't had a lot of other participation in this project. I mean, the last project that was on Monterey, we had a pretty good amount of public testimony. This one's been to the Planning Commission and to the Architecture Review Commission and to the Cultural Heritage Committee in the revision. It was previously approved, so like the San Luis Drive neighbors in any case haven't been engaged in this one, and this wasn't something that we were expecting. But and I don't necessarily give credence to what has been submitted, but I need time to evaluate that.
I guess the reason I ask is just, I don't think any of us are opining on whether it is a tactic, but if it is a tactic, of course we would want to prevent that or at least minimize the impact that could have on moving us forward with the project.
Yeah, and the speaker is correct. The Planning Commission can approve the project tonight, and that's not our recommendation, but it is your authority to do so.
Sure. Commissioner Munoz-Morris.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of a perfect entry to what I wanted to ask, which is along the same lines as my fellow commissioners are pointing out. I guess my question would then be, could we recommend approval with with some considerations, like approval provided no findings come out of city staff's review of the letter to kind of help us move forward today, but also, because it seems to me like the request to continue doesn't come out of a need for compliance to provide that answer, but more to just to be thorough and make sure that we got it right. So are we able to move forward with the assumption that we got it right? And should something come up, we bring it back?
Our recommendation would be that if a majority of the planning commission would approve the project tonight, that you state that for the benefit of the applicant from the standpoint of confidence moving forward, but, and for staff, just in terms of, that you accept our recommendations, but our recommendation would continue to be that you continue consideration, and I'll ask Marky to talk more specifically about why.
Yeah, so I think like Michael said and the public speaker said, we do generally have a lot of confidence in our staff to get it right, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvement, in a given situation, and we just feel like we need the time to evaluate that. And so I would just echo what Michael says, that my legal recommendation would be to state generally if you would be in favor of the project, but to continue the item to allow staff to adequately address the environmental concerns raised and get that into the record in a meaningful way.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I guess the one thing that stands out to me with this particular project is that since it's been reviewed and approved previously, I would expect a letter of that nature to come with pretty concrete evidence, I guess, or facts as to where these issues are. Because otherwise it's, you assume that we got it right in the review and, many eyes saw it already. So, but again, I'm not trying to put pressure. It seems like city still wants a little bit extra time. And I think that's fine with me, although I am supportive of the project in general, because I think it's, this third version is definitely the better one of the three they've been presented today. But that being said, it sounds like the best thing is to buy that extra time, so, yeah, thank you.
May I also just add to Chair Quincy's kind of original concern about how can we prevent this from happening every meeting and getting these late comments. In my, limited experience here at the city, 2 years, we often receive agenda correspondence afternoon of, and oftentimes staff is able to pivot and add in slides to the presentation that address the issues raised. And so this isn't our default position. It's not one we take lightly. And, just given the complexity of the project and the history of it with the environmental documents associated, we just did not, one, have the time to do it or the information in an hour and a half before the meeting.
Commissioner Hopkins?
Just one quick question. How long would it take to do the kind of review you're talking about, and when is the soonest we could agendize if we're to continue tonight?
Well, Brian, you've got the agenda forecast, and so, if you can look, at September, September 14th, September 28th, are those hearings open?
Yeah, there's, on the September 14th meeting, there's 2 items currently, the safety element updates for the climate change adaptation and the safe parking project at Railroad Square. So potentially could be continued to a date certain to that hearing date, and I believe there's nothing on the 9/28 meeting also. So that meeting's clear. If the desire was to continue to a date certain.
So that would be the soonest. It's probably not possible to bring this back on August 24th. Is there anything on the August 24th agenda?
Yeah, that agenda, that meeting was actually scheduled to be canceled. There's nothing on that agenda.
Okay.
So would that make the soonest September 14th?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from commissioners? Are the commissioners good with perhaps voting on maybe on the continuance first and then offering our.
Did we have a motion already?
I don't think there was a motion, so.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
And I'm basing this on what I'm hearing from staff, that maybe the best way to keep this project moving is actually the continuance right now. And hopefully that's the case. So I'll move that we continue this item. I would prefer a date certain. It sounds like September 14th is a possibility. Is that realistic from a staff point of view? I don't want to create an impossibility.
So if you continue it to a date certain, that's fine. And if we're not ready to bring it back for that meeting, then you'll have a staff report with one line on it that basically requests the continuance. So that's fine.
Yeah, I'd love to see it moving. And I just, as a quick comment, I think this is a marvelous project, much better than before. I'm really proud also of our Cultural Heritage Commission really pushing to come up with something that honors the 100-year-old vision for this site. I think it's going to be a jewel for the city if we can get this going, and I'm really excited about it. So let's see how it plays out here.
And I'll happily second. I agree. I think it's a great project. I think the circumstances around this are a little unfortunate, but I think we're doing what we can. And the part of this process is, having trust in staff. And I think it's a vote of confidence in your discretion here. And yeah, thank you.
Any other comments? Maybe we just go down the line to see if there are. Commissioner Munoz. Yes, there was a second.
Yeah, I basically echo what my colleagues are saying. I think should it not be for city's recommendation to continue, I would be in favor of approving it because I think it's a really nice product. My one concern was around the access to the property because it's right by the freeway entrance, but there don't seem to be any concern there, so no need to highlight something that doesn't seem to be an issue. And just to say that, I believe in having a clear and fair and transparent process, and that's why I'm in favor of this continuation, but I don't like delay tactics, so to the comments that we received tonight, I completely understand that, and I empathize with the applicant who might have to wait a couple more weeks, but hang in there. Hopefully it's just a formality.
Ditto on that. I support the project, and I actually went out and visited the site and used that access onto that ramp where Highway 101 is, and you got to be awake and look both ways, but you should be doing that when you're driving anyway. So I support the project and support the continuance.
Commissioner Francis.
Happy to support the project. I think it's a really interesting use of the property, especially with the nod to history. I lament a little bit the loss of the lower price points, but I think it's going to be a really cool project when it's done.
And I'm likewise supportive and sympathetic to the public comment, but I think an unfortunate reality is if this is a tactic, CEQA can certainly be weaponized, and hopefully by delaying it actually helps. So we have a motion and a second, and can we have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Yes.
Commissioner Hopkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Francis?
Yes.
Commissioner Munoz Morris?
Yes.
Vice Chair Khan?
Yes.
Chair Quincy?
Yes. So, motion passes.
Yes, motion
Okay.
passes.
So we'll move on to Senior Planner Brian Lavelle. Do you have an update for us regarding our next meetings?
I think I already provided the agenda forecast in that discussion. So again, just briefly, the 8/24 meeting is scheduled to be canceled, and then the two items I mentioned for 9/14, and now we have the continuation based on the PC's action.
Great, thank you.
That's all I have.
And then I guess the last kind of order of business is that this will be my last meeting, and yeah, so you will have the good fortune of having Vice Chair Khan steer the ship, I think, and I first wanted to just thank staff. You guys have been absolutely wonderful, and in particular Megan and Marky and Michael and Tyler. You guys are amazing. And then my fellow commissioners, it has been a total privilege to work with you all. Steve and Bob, we've been on for a while, and it's been really awesome meeting and getting to know that our new faces as well. So thank you all, and yeah, best of luck to you all. So yeah.
Good luck.
All right, thank you.
Could I add additional
Got your
comment?
dream job.
Because of our size, if he's gone and then we already have a commissioner down, we have 5. So on September the 14th, there's probably a 90% chance I'll be out of state on a vacation. So September 14th, I probably will not be here. So I just want to make sure you know that. There's a chance I will be, but thank you.
Just with that, if there are any other commissioners that are planning to be absent on the 14th, let us know ASAP so that we can ensure there's a quorum. Yeah.
Did I say I won't be there? The next regular meeting is scheduled for September 14th at 6 p.m. in the council chambers, and the regular meeting on August 24th will be canceled. Thank you.